Her name is unknown to us. We do not know what she called herself. We do not know the name of her community, her language, or the specific landscape she walked every day. We know almost nothing about her except one thing. 20,000 years ago, in the region we today call the Democratic Republic of Congo, she picked up a bone, the fibula of a baboon, and she began to carve marks into it. Not random marks, not decorative scratches, deliberate, organized, mathematically structured notches arranged in specific groupings that modern mathematicians have spent decades analyzing. Groupings that show an understanding of prime numbers, of arithmetic sequences, of mathematical organization so sophisticated that when this bone was first presented to the scientific community in the 1950s, researchers initially refused to believe it was African. This bone, the Ishango bone, is the oldest mathematical object ever discovered on Earth. It predates any European mathematical tradition by thousands of years. It predates ancient Greek mathematics by 15,000 years. It is the earliest evidence of mathematical thinking in the entire history of our species. And the mathematical principles encoded in its notches, prime numbers, binary groupings, structured numerical sequences are the same foundational principles that run every computer, every smartphone, every piece of digital technology on Earth today. Today, on the African memory, we trace the line. The unbroken, documented, extraordinary line from a carved bone in Central Africa 20,000 years ago to the device you are watching this video on right now. Because the mathematics that built the modern world did not begin where you were told it began. This is not just history. This is your history. Let's remember it together. The Ishango bone. Let's start with the object itself. Because the Ishango bone is not a theory. It is not a claim. It is a physical artifact currently housed in the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences in Brussels that has been dated, analyzed, and studied by mathematicians and archaeologists for over 70 years. It was discovered in 1950 by Belgian geologist Jean de Heinzelin de Brocault at a site called Ishango on the shores of Lake Edward in what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is approximately 10 centimeters long. It is the fibula, the smaller of the two lower leg bones, of a baboon. And it has a sharp piece of quartz attached to one end, suggesting it was used as a writing or carving tool as well as a mathematical recording device. The bone has 3 columns of notches carved into it. And when mathematicians analyzed those columns, what they found was extraordinary. The first column contains notches in groupings of 11, 13, 17, and 19. Those 4 numbers, 11, 13, 17, 19, are all prime numbers, and together they add up to 60. The second column contains notches in groupings that double each other, 3 and 6, 4 and 8, 10 and 5, demonstrating an understanding of doubling and halving, the mathematical operation that sits at the core of binary arithmetic. The third column contains groupings that also add up to 60, approached from a different mathematical direction. Prime numbers, doubling sequences, arithmetic organization across multiple columns. 20,000 years ago, in Africa, the mathematician Dr. Claudia Zaslavsky, in her landmark 1973 book Africa Counts, argued that the Ishango bone represents not just mathematical recording, but mathematical thinking. That the person who carved it was not just counting, they were exploring number relationships. investigating mathematical patterns, doing in the most fundamental sense mathematics. This was not primitive scratching. This was science, and the Ishango Bone is not alone. The Lebombo Bone, discovered in the Lebombo Mountains on the border of South Africa and Eswatini, is even older, approximately 43,000 years old. It is a baboon fibula with 29 notches carved into it, a sequence that corresponds to the lunar cycle, 29 days, the cycle of the moon. This means that 43,000 years ago, in southern Africa, human beings were tracking astronomical cycles through mathematical recording. They were building a relationship between observation, number, and time that is the absolute foundation of every scientific tradition that followed. 43,000 years ago, in Africa, doing astronomy through mathematics. When people talk about the origins of science, the origins of the systematic observation of the natural world through quantitative recording, this is where that story begins. Not in ancient Greece, not in Mesopotamia. In Africa, tens of thousands of years before either. The African mathematical tradition did not begin with the Ishango and Lebombo bones. Those are simply the oldest physical evidence we have found so far. Mathematical thinking was woven into the fabric of African life across the continent in ways that Western scholarship has consistently undervalued, misunderstood, and in some cases actively ignored. Let us move forward in time from the ancient bones to the medieval world. Because the story of African mathematics does not stop with prehistory. It continues, develops, and reaches extraordinary heights of sophistication right through the medieval period. We have visited Timbuktu before on the African Memory in our video on Mansa Musa. We talked about the University of Sankore and its 25,000 students. But today I want to go inside the library because what the manuscripts of Timbuktu contain about mathematics is breathtaking. Among the over 700,000 manuscripts discovered in Timbuktu, a significant number deal explicitly with mathematics, astronomy, and what we would today call applied science. These texts show African scholars working with algebra, geometry, arithmetic, and astronomical calculation at a level of sophistication that was at the absolute frontier of medieval global knowledge. These were not copies of Arab or European texts. These were original African scholarly contributions, building on, extending, and in some cases surpassing the mathematical knowledge available elsewhere in the medieval world. Scholars working in Timbuktu were calculating the movements of celestial bodies, developing geometric proofs, working through algebraic problems, and recording all of it in their own language, in their own script, in institutions they had built themselves. This is the African mathematical tradition at its medieval peak. Rigorous, original, sophisticated, and almost completely unknown to the global audience that has been taught that mathematical progress was a European and Middle Eastern achievement. Now let us make the connection that this video has been building toward, because this is where African mathematical history stops being ancient and starts being immediate, personal, present. Binary code is the language of computers. Every piece of digital information, every photograph, every message, every video, every transaction, every piece of software is ultimately expressed in binary, in ones and zeros, in a system based entirely on two states, on and off, 1 and 0, combined in sequences to represent any information imaginable. Binary arithmetic was formalized by the German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in 1689. And Leibniz is almost universally credited as the inventor of binary mathematics. But here is what the history of binary mathematics actually shows when you look at it honestly and completely. First, the doubling sequences on the Ishango Bone, 3 and 6, 4 and 8, represent exactly the kind of base 2 mathematical thinking that binary arithmetic is built upon, 20,000 years before Leibniz. Second, and this is the part that most Western mathematical historians have been extraordinarily reluctant to discuss, Leibniz himself, in his published writings on binary arithmetic, explicitly referenced the I Ching, the ancient Chinese system of hexagrams, as a conceptual influence. He saw in the I Ching system of broken and unbroken lines a confirmation of his binary ideas. But the I Ching itself, as scholars of comparative mathematics have noted, shares structural similarities with the geomantic divination systems of West Africa. Specifically, the Ifa divination system of the Yoruba people of West Africa. Ifa, the sacred divination system of the Yoruba, practiced across West Africa and carried to the Americas through the slave trade, where it survives today in traditions like candomblé and santeria, is structurally binary. In Ifa divination, a diviner casts palm nuts or a divining chain and records the result as either a single mark or a double mark. Two possible states, ones and zeros. The results are combined in sequences of 8, producing 256 possible combinations. Each combination has a name, a set of associated wisdom texts, and a meaning. (256 combination). If you know anything about computing, that number will be immediately familiar. Because 256 is 2 to the power of 8. It is the number of values that can be represented by 8 binary digits, 1 byte. The fundamental unit of digital information. The Ifa system, developed by the Yoruba people of West Africa, is a 256-based binary information system. It was recognized by UNESCO in 2005 as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And its mathematical structure, its binary base 256 combination architecture, is conceptually identical to the mathematical architecture of modern computing. The Yoruba did not build computers. I am not claiming they did. What I am claiming, what the mathematical evidence supports, is that the logical framework, the binary thinking, the structured combinatorial system that makes modern computing possible was present in West African intellectual tradition long before it appeared in European mathematics. That is not a small claim. That is a rewriting of the history of ideas. And the binary code connection is not even the most visually stunning example of African mathematical sophistication that connects directly to modern technology. Ron Iglash is an American mathematician and professor. In the 1980s and 1990s, he traveled across Africa studying the mathematical structures of traditional African architecture, art, and design. And what he found, published in his 1999 book African Fractals, fundamentally challenged everything Western mathematics thought it knew about where fractal geometry came from. Fractal geometry, the mathematics of self-similar, infinitely repeating patterns, was formalized by the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot in 1975. It is today one of the most important branches of applied mathematics used in computer graphics, antenna design, financial modeling, medical imaging, and the compression algorithms that make digital images and videos possible. Mandelbrot is credited as its discoverer. And in the Western mathematical tradition, he was. But Iglash found fractal geometry embedded throughout traditional African design centuries before Mandelbrot. The layout of villages, the design of textiles, the architecture of homes, the patterns in hairstyles, the structure of ceremonial objects, not accidentally, not as random decoration, deliberately, with mathematical intentionality. African designers and architects were applying what we now call fractal principles, self-similarity at different scales, recursive patterns, geometric complexity arising from simple rules as a conscious design philosophy. Eglash documented this across dozens of cultures and countries, from the Fulani of West Africa to the Mokulek village in Cameroon to the layouts of cities in Madagascar. The fractal principle was not a single discovery in one place. It was a mathematical understanding embedded in African design tradition across the continent. The similarity unmistakable. And here is the extraordinary irony at the heart of this story. The fractal compression algorithms that allow you to store photographs on your phone, that make digital images transmittable across the internet, that are embedded in the technology you use every single day, are applications of the same mathematical principles that African designers were encoding into their villages and textiles centuries ago. The mathematics that compresses the image on your screen in African textile, centuries before the algorithm. The history of mathematics, like all history, was written by specific people in specific places with specific interests. And the history of mathematics, as it was constructed in European universities in the 18th and 19th centuries during the height of colonial expansion, followed a very clear and very convenient narrative. Mathematics began in ancient Greece. It was developed in the Islamic Golden Age. It was perfected in the European Enlightenment. Africa, in this narrative, was not a participant in mathematical history. It was absent, silent, waiting. The Ishango Bone was discovered in 1950. It took decades for mainstream mathematics to accept its mathematical significance, and some still resist the full implications of what it means for the history of mathematical thought. The Timbuktu manuscripts, containing advanced medieval African mathematics, were largely inaccessible to Western scholarship until the late 20th century. And even now, the number of Western mathematical historians who seriously engage with them is vanishingly small. Ron Eglash's African Fractals, rigorous, documented, peer-reviewed, has been praised and then largely sidelined by a mainstream mathematical history that does not know how to incorporate it without rewriting everything. The suppression of African mathematical history is not a conspiracy. It is something more mundane and more pervasive than that. It is the simple, self-reinforcing momentum of a tradition that never looked and therefore never saw. We are looking, and we are seeing, and what we see changes everything. Fractal 1,000 years ago, a woman in what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo picked up a bone and began to count, to observe, to organize, to think mathematically about the world around her. She did not know that what she was doing would one day be recognized as the earliest mathematical thinking in human history. She did not know that the doubling sequences she carved would echo 20,000 years later in the binary architecture of a global digital civilization. She just knew that numbers mattered, that patterns were real, that the world had a mathematical structure, and that human minds were capable of perceiving it. Africa did not receive mathematics from the outside world. Africa gave mathematics to the world. And the world, for reasons we now understand very well, forgot to say thank you. The African memory is saying it now. On behalf of the woman with the bone. On behalf of the scholars of Timbuktu. On behalf of the Yoruba diviners whose binary system encoded the logic of the digital age. On behalf of every African designer who built fractal geometry into a village layout centuries before a European mathematician gave it a name. Thank you. We remember you. We see you. We will not let your contribution be buried again. Subscribe to the African Memory. Share this video, especially with a young African person who has been made to feel that mathematics is not theirs. Because it is. It always was. Leave a comment. What from today's video are you going to share first? And come back, because next time we are going into something you can't afford to miss. See you in the next video. The African Memory. Remembering Africa. Reclaiming meaning. I'll see you in the next one.